Indefatigable.
Indefatigable.
An indefatigable campaigner for human rights. Indefensible.
Indefensible.
The law is morally indefensible and in need of reform.
Indefinable.
Indefinable.
She felt an indefinable sadness.
Indefinite.
Indefinite.
The next day, the union voted to begin an indefinite strike.
The picture has been loaned for an indefinite period to the National Gallery.
Teachers find the report's terminology so indefinite that it is confusing.
Indefinite article.
Indefinite article.
Indefinitely.
Indefinitely.
The project has been postponed indefinitely.
Indefinite pronoun.
Indefinite pronoun.
Indelible.
Indelible.
Her words left an indelible impression on me for years to come. Her words left an indelible impression on me for years to come. A moment indelibly imprinted on my mind. A moment indelibly imprinted on my mind. Indelicate.
Indelicate.
An indelicate comment.
Indemnify.
Indemnify.
Indemnity.
Indemnity.
Insurance providing indemnity against future liabilities. Insurance providing indemnity against future liabilities.
Indent.
Indent.
Use the tab key to indent the first line of the paragraph.
He cancelled the indent for silk scarves.
Indentation.
Indentation.
Make an indentation in the center of each cookie.
Indented.
Indented.
Our deeply indented coastline.
Indenture.
Indenture.
Indentured servants. Independence.
Independence.
Nigeria gained independence from Britain in 1960.
The country has made great advances since independence.
Ways of helping old people maintain their independence. Ways of helping old people maintain their independence. Having a job gives you financial independence.
Independence Day.
Independence Day.
Independent. Independent.
There are plans to split the corporation into a number of smaller independent companies. An independent charity.
Small independent bookshops.
We need a central bank that is independent of the government.
Schools in the independent sector. Schools in the independent sector. Independent television companies.
An independent panel of scientists. An independent body has been set up to monitor government spending.
There were no independent witnesses to the shooting.
Human rights groups have called for an independent inquiry into the killings.
The results of an independent study.
India became independent in 1947.
Now that my sons are more independent, I have more time for myself. An independent young woman. He's helping other people with spinal injuries to lead an independent life. He's helping other people with spinal injuries to lead an independent life.
By this age, the child becomes relatively independent of his mother. It was always very important to me to be financially independent.
Robert aimed to be independent of his parents by the time he was 20. The tapes can be used in class or for independent study.
Reports from two separate sources entirely independent of one another.
3 independent studies all arrived at the same conclusion.
Independent candidates won 3 seats.
The 2 departments operate independently of each other.
She had elderly parents who could no longer live independently.
Independent clause.
Independent clause.
In-depth.
In-depth.
An in-depth study of patients' needs.
A series of in-depth interviews.
Indescribable.
Indescribable.
A feeling of indescribable joy. An indescribably awful smell.
Indestructible.
Indestructible.
Her indestructible optimism.
Gold is virtually indestructible.
Indeterminable.
Indeterminable.
Water of indeterminable depth.
Indeterminate.
Indeterminate.
A girl of indeterminate age.
Index.
Index.
The changing size of an infant's head is considered an index of brain growth.
The reports are indexed by subject and location.
Demands that wages be indexed to the rise in prices.
An amount indexed for inflation.
Index card.
Index card.
Index finger.
Index finger.
Index linked.
Index linked.
Indian.
Indian.
Do you fancy going out for an Indian?
Indian summer.
Indian summer.
Indicate.
Indicate.
Research indicates that over 81% of teachers are dissatisfied with their salary.
Long skid marks on the pavement indicated the driver had attempted to brake. Long skid marks on the pavement indicated the driver had attempted to brake.
The study indicates a connection between poverty and crime.
The Russians have already indicated their willingness to cooperate.
Professor Johnson has indicated his intention to retire at the end of next year.
Ralph patted the sofa to indicate that she should join him. Ralph patted the sofa to indicate that she should join him.
Please indicate your preference on the booking form. That's her, said Toby, indicating a girl on the other side of the room.
Sales targets are indicated on the graph by a vertical dotted line. Sales targets are indicated on the graph by a vertical dotted line.
Don't forget to indicate before you pull out.
Indication.
Indication.
Dark green leaves are a good indication of healthy roots.
He gave no indication at all of his own feelings.
Could you give me some indication as to when I'm likely to receive a reply?
Taking a career history along with you will be a clear indication that you are well organised.
Indications are that the situation hasn't improved much. Indications are that the situation hasn't improved much.
There is every indication that it is true.
Indicative.
Indicative.
This behaviour is indicative of her whole attitude, I'm afraid.
Indicator.
Indicator.
All the main economic indicators suggest that trade is improving. All the main economic indicators suggest that trade is improving.
Indices.
Indices.
Indict.
Indict.
He was indicted for vehicular homicide in 1987. He was indicted for vehicular homicide in 1987.
Indictable.
Indictable.
Indictment.
Indictment.
The fact that these children cannot read is a damning indictment of our education system. The fact that these children cannot read is a damning indictment of our education system.
Indie.
Indie.
Indie music. An indie band. Indifference.
Indifference.
His apparent indifference to material luxuries. Whether you stay or leave is a matter of total indifference to me. Whether you stay or leave is a matter of total indifference to me.
Indigenous.
Indigenous.
Blueberries are indigenous to America. The many indigenous cultures which existed in Siberia.
Indigent.
Indigent.
Indigestible.
Indigestible.
Indigestible statistics.
Indigestion.
Indigestion.
Indignant.
Indignant.
Liz was indignant at the way her child had been treated.
An indignant reply.
Of course I didn't tell her, Sasha said indignantly.
Indignation.
Indignation.
To his indignation, Charles found that his name was not on the list.
Lou's voice quivered with indignation.
Her indignation at such rough treatment was understandable.
He stormed into her office, full of righteous indignation.
Indignity.
Indignity.
The prisoners were subjected to all sorts of indignities. 2 of the diplomats suffered the indignity of being arrested.
Indigo.
Indigo.
Indirect.
Indirect.
Losing weight is an indirect result of smoking cigarettes. The indirect effects of climate change may be profound.
They took an indirect route, avoiding the town centre. George's comments were an indirect way of blaming me.
Perhaps I was indirectly responsible for the misunderstanding.
Indirect cost.
Indirect cost.
Indirect discourse.
Indirect discourse.
Indirect object.
Indirect object.
Indirect speech.
Indirect speech. Indirect tax.
Indirect tax.
Indiscipline.
Indiscipline.
Indiscipline among the troops eventually led to a riot.
Indiscernible.
Indiscernible.
The path was almost indiscernible in the mist.
Indiscreet.
Indiscreet.
It was very indiscreet of Colin to tell them about our plan.
Indiscretion.
Indiscretion.
L describes his past links with the racist group as a youthful indiscretion. L describes his past links with the racist group as a youthful indiscretion. L describes his past links with the racist group as a youthful indiscretion. Rumours of the former president's sexual indiscretions. Indiscriminate.
Indiscriminate.
Terrorists responsible for indiscriminate killing.
The indiscriminate use of chemical fertilizers.
Soldiers fired indiscriminately into the crowd.
Indispensable.
Indispensable.
This book is indispensable to anyone interested in space exploration.
Meat is not indispensable for maintaining a healthy diet.
Mobile phones have become an indispensable part of our lives.
Indisposed.
Indisposed.
Mrs. Rawlins is temporarily indisposed.
Indisposition.
Indisposition.
Indisputable.
Indisputable.
The evidence was indisputable.
Indissoluble.
Indissoluble.
The indissoluble link between language and culture.
Indistinct.
Indistinct.
She muttered something indistinct.
My memory of what happened next is indistinct. Indistinguishable.
Indistinguishable.
An artificial material that is almost indistinguishable from real silk.
Individual.
Individual.
Each individual leaf on the tree is different.
The needs of the individual customer.
Children get more individual attention in small classes.
You can have the bathroom designed to suit your individual needs. You can have the bathroom designed to suit your individual needs.
Individual portions of jam.
A tennis player with a highly individual style.
A very individual way of dressing.
The rights of the individual. Each individual receives 2 genes, one inherited from each parent.
Most churches were built with donations from private individuals. Most churches were built with donations from private individuals.
A strange-looking individual.
Individualism.
Individualism.
Capitalism encourages competition and individualism. Individualist.
Individualist.
Jeff was too much of an individualist to be team captain.
She has a highly individualistic approach to painting.
Individuality.
Individuality.
We like our staff to show their individuality rather than wear a uniform.
Individualized.
Individualized.
An individualized training program.
Individually.
Individually.
The bridegroom thanked them all individually. Individually wrapped portions of cheese. Individuate.
Individuate.
The characters in the play are beautifully individuated.
Indivisible.
Indivisible.
Indo.
Indo.
Indo-European languages.
Indoctrinate.
Indoctrinate.
People were indoctrinated not to question their leaders.
The military in particular was subjected to intense political indoctrination. The military in particular was subjected to intense political indoctrination.
Indo-European.
Indo-European.
Indolent.
Indolent.
Indomitable.
Indomitable.
An indomitable old lady. Alice was a woman of indomitable spirit.
Indoor.
Indoor.
An indoor swimming pool.
The World Indoor Athletics Championship.
Too much central heating can harm indoor plants.
Endorse.
Endorse.
Indoors.
Indoors.
Let's go indoors and have something to eat.
It rained all day, so we had to stay indoors.
Indrawn.
Indrawn.
She heard Mitch's swiftly indrawn breath.
Indubitably.
Indubitably.
Mr. Sachs is indubitably charming.
Induce.
Induce.
Nothing would induce me to vote for him again.
She had to be induced because the baby was 4 weeks late.
The doctor decided to induce labour.
Patients with eating disorders may use drugs to induce vomiting.
A drug-induced coma. A drug-induced coma. Inducement.
Inducement.
Businesses were offered inducements to move to the area.
Financial inducements to attract good job candidates. Financial inducements to attract good job candidates.
Induct.
Induct.
18 new junior ministers were inducted into the government.
Barry was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 1987. Barry was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 1987.
Inductee.
Inductee.
Induction.
Induction.
A 2-day induction course.
Mrs. Simpson is responsible for the induction of new library staff.
Induction coil.
Induction coil.
Inductive.
Inductive.
Inductive reasoning.
Indulge.
Indulge.
Most of us were too busy to indulge in heavy lunchtime drinking. Eva had never been one to indulge in self-pity. Even if you're dieting, you can indulge yourself once in a while.
Ray has enough money to indulge his taste for expensive wines.
His mother spoilt him, indulging his every whim.
Women do not indulge in crime to the same extent as men. Indulgence.
Indulgence.
An occasional glass of wine was his only indulgence.
A spirit of indulgence and forgiveness.
Indulgent.
Indulgent.
Toys bought by their indulgent grandparents.
Industrial.
Industrial.
Industrial production has risen by 0.5% since November.
Rapid post-war industrial development.
Last year, 1.3 million workers took part in industrial disputes.
A meeting of the world's major industrial nations.
Pollution in industrial areas.
By 1900, Britain was a mainly industrial society.
Industrial action.
Industrial action.
Industrial archaeology.
Industrial archaeology.
Industrial arts.
Industrial arts.
Industrial espionage.
Industrial espionage.
Industrial estate.
Industrial estate.
Industrialist.
Industrialist.
Industrialism.
Industrialism.
Industrialization.
Industrialization.
Industrialized.
Industrialized.
Industrial relations.
Industrial relations.
Industrial revolution.
Industrial revolution.
Industrial strength.
Industrial strength.
They served us industrial strength coffee. Industrial tribunal.
Industrial tribunal.
Industrious.
Industrious.
Industry.
Industry.
This type of software is widely used in industry.
Workers in manufacturing industry.
An agreement that will be welcomed by both sides of industry.
I work in the oil industry. Italy's thriving tourist industry.
Gould is a man of great industry.
Another book from the Shakespeare industry.
In-ear.
In-ear.
Inebriated.
Inebriated.
Inedible.
Inedible.
The meat was so burnt that it was inedible.
Ineducable.
Ineducable.
Ineffable.
Ineffable.
Ineffable joy.
Ineffective.
Ineffective.
The chemical was almost totally ineffective in killing the weeds. Various drugs have proved ineffective against the virus.
An ineffective marketing campaign.
The ineffectiveness of most diets.
Ineffectual.
Ineffectual.
An ineffectual leader.
She remembered her ineffectual efforts to comfort him.
Inefficient.
Inefficient.
An inefficient use of resources. Local government was inefficient. Problems due to the inefficiency of management.
Inelegant.
Inelegant.
An inelegant expression.
Ineligible.
Ineligible.
Temporary workers are ineligible for the pension scheme.
People under 18 are ineligible to vote.
Ineluctable.
Ineluctable.
Inept.
Inept.
Inept leadership.
He was criticized for his inept handling of the problem.
Blake was intellectually able but politically inept.
Ineptitude.
Ineptitude.
Aptitude of the people in charge. Inequality.
Inequality.
There are inequalities in wealth distribution.
Inequality of opportunity. Inequalities between men and women. A policy that aims to redress racial inequalities.
Inequitable.
Inequitable.
An inequitable distribution of wealth.
Inequity.
Inequity.
The inequities of the legal system.
Inequities in the distribution of research funding.
A report on racial inequity in the UK. A report on racial inequity in the UK.
Ineradicable.
Ineradicable.
Ineradicable hostility.
Inert.
Inert.
Inert gases.
He lay inert in his bed.
The government was inert and inefficient.
Inertia.
Inertia.
Political inertia.
Inescapable.
Inescapable.
She didn't want to confront the inescapable fact that she would have to sell the house.
The inescapable conclusion is that he was murdered by someone in his own family.
Inessential.
Inessential.
Inessential details.
Inestimable.
Inestimable.
A painting of inestimable value.
Inevitability.
Inevitability.
The inevitability of death. Inevitable.
Inevitable.
A further escalation of the crisis now seems inevitable.
It's inevitable that doctors will make the occasional mistake. It's inevitable that doctors will make the occasional mistake.
Disease was an inevitable consequence of poor living conditions.
One day the inevitable happened and I got a speeding ticket. One day the inevitable happened and I got a speeding ticket.
Inevitably.
Inevitably.
The decision will inevitably lead to political tensions.
Inevitably, the situation did not please everyone.
Inexact.
Inexact.
Earthquake prediction is an inexact science.
Inexcusable.
Inexcusable.
An inexcusable act of aggression.
Inexhaustible.
Inexhaustible.
She has an inexhaustible supply of funny stories.
A man of inexhaustible energy.
Inexorable.
Inexorable.
The inexorable decline of Britain's manufacturing industry.
The seemingly inexorable rise in crime. The seemingly inexorable rise in crime.
Inexpensive.
Inexpensive.
A good selection of inexpensive wines.
Painting is a relatively inexpensive way to enhance your home.
Inexperience.
Inexperience.
Youthful inexperience.
Inexperienced.
Inexperienced.
Inexperienced pilots.
Inexpert.
Inexpert.
An inexperienced and inexpert teacher.
Inexplicable.
Inexplicable.
Inexplicable behavior.
For some inexplicable reason, he felt depressed.
Inexpressible.
Inexpressible.
Inexpressible gratitude.
Inexpressive.
Inexpressive.
In extremis.
In extremis.
Inextricable.
Inextricable.
The inextricable connection between language and culture.
Inextricably.
Inextricably.
Physical health is inextricably linked to mental health.
Economic and social history are inextricably bound up with each other.
Infallible.
Infallible.
No expert is infallible. An infallible memory.
He had an infallible cure for a hangover. He had an infallible cure for a hangover.
Infamous.
Infamous.
An infamous killer.
Los Angeles's infamous smog.
This area is infamous for drugs and prostitution.
Infamy.
Infamy.
Infancy.
Infancy.
In the past, many children died in infancy. The infancy of radio broadcasting.
Genetic engineering is still in its infancy.
Infant.
Infant.
An infant's skin is very sensitive.
Infant formula milk.
Infant industries.
Infanticide.
Infanticide.
Infantile.
Infantile.
Infantile jokes.
Infantile development.
Infantile paralysis.
Infantile paralysis.
Infant mortality rate.
Infant mortality rate.
Infantry.
Infantry.
An infantry regiment.
Infantryman.
Infantryman.
Infatuated.
Infatuated.
John had become infatuated with the French teacher.
My mother's infatuated with dieting.
Infatuation.
Infatuation.
The current infatuation with 70s style.
Shaw's infatuation with the actress is evident in his writing.
Infect.
Infect.
People with the virus may feel perfectly well, but they can still infect others.
The number of people infected with HIV.
Eggs known to be infected with salmonella were allowed to go on sale. Eggs known to be infected with salmonella were allowed to go on sale.
Lucy's enthusiasm soon infected the rest of the class.
Infected.
Infected.
An infected finger.
Clean the wound so it doesn't get infected.
Infection.
Infection.
The baby had an ear infection. An infection of the bladder.
Always sterilize the needle to prevent infection.
Infectious.
Infectious.
Infectious diseases.
Flu is highly infectious.
An infectious smile.
Infectious enthusiasm.
Infer.
Infer.
A lot can be inferred from these statistics.
From the evidence, we can infer that the victim knew her killer.
Inference.
Inference.
What inferences have you drawn from this evidence?
He was portrayed as a hero, and by inference, Thompson as the villain.
Inferential evidence.
Inferior.
Inferior.
I felt very inferior among all those academics. Wine of inferior quality.
Inferior goods.
I always felt slightly inferior to her. Their performance was inferior to that of other teams.
An inferior court of law.
He refused to accept a job of inferior status.
Inferiority.
Inferiority.
Moral inferiority.
He had a deep-rooted feeling of inferiority.
Inferiority complex.
Inferiority complex.
Infernal.
Infernal.
I wish the children would stop that infernal noise.
Inferno.
Inferno.
Within minutes, the house had become a raging inferno. She was desperately trying to calm the inferno raging within her.